Hi, this is Jason. What I'm about to show you right now is a motivational interviewing discussion between two friends of mine. And the purpose of this is just to give a little bit of commentary and some instruction along the way as we watch this conversation between two friends.
Right.
Starts out
So,
with me.
Kathleen, everyone has some stressors that are happening in their lives. Would it be okay if we talked about some of yours that you're experiencing right now?
Absolutely.
So, what would you say comes to mind? Are there a few things? Are there just a list that would come to your mind to to discuss today, or just brain dump a bit of what are some of the key stressors going on for you right now?
So, one thing I should mention here is we are not therapists and we're not providing therapy to anyone. We're a group of people that are trying to learn these motivational interviewing skills so that we can be better in conversations and help and bless people in our communities. So, we're not looking at diagnosable mental illnesses. We're not representing ourselves as therapists. We're talking about stressors. This is a real conversation, and as you'll see, we'll get into some real issues. But it's not therapy, not meant to be therapy, not represented as therapy. It's just an example of how a good conversation can be helpful and how we can help each other.
Yes, time management and just so many things coming at me without planning, just last minute. Got to run to the hospital to see this person or that person, just not being able to keep my head above water. And that's a lot of stressors, but in one category.
Mm-hmm. Right. So time management, but regarding several different things. What are some of the key pieces of the time management? Are there key areas that you're feeling are most important?
Now, if you know anything about motivational interviewing, you might be saying, well, let's be careful with that question because that might lead to some sustained talk where someone is going to give more reasons why they can't change or what are the difficulties. Yes and no. That really what we're focusing on in this exercise is how to focus a conversation, and I don't know another way to focus a conversation than to begin kind of broad and see what the issues are and then narrow in. So it's always a dance between those two things, but I think Amanda is right on track in terms of the questions that she's asking here.
Maybe um, getting organized and scheduling stuff so that I can schedule time for myself.
Okay. So getting organized, scheduling, and time for yourself. From the, what would you say are things that have been interrupting or making it hard to schedule time for yourself or to organize?
So again, some people who are familiar with motivational interviewing might be saying to themselves, "Oh, that question's probably going to get some change talk." I, I don't see though how it's avoidable. If we want to accurately listen to what's happening in someone's life, we're going to have to ask some questions about what the difficulties and the problems are, even if that means we're going to get some sustained talk. It's possible as well that these difficulties could bring up reasons why I need to change. So it could go either way.
That I can't say no. Not saying no.
Okay. So boundaries
Yeah.
and not being able to say no. So that's a little bit different in a way. So you have time management that you're thinking about, organization, also boundaries.
True.
If one of those are rising to the surface, or maybe the foundation, what would you say is maybe the first place to begin?
Okay, so excellent summary. She summarized the things and then immediately placed the responsibility for what we do next into Kathleen's lap. This is her life, her set of issues. What does she think we should do next? So very on point.
Probably the boundaries, because if I organize and schedule and time management, my boundaries are consistently blowing those up.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe boundaries, yeah.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Okay, so boundaries, starting there is then a key ripple effect to making it easier to have management of your time and organization.
So good. She just stated it as a fact and gave a little bit of a summary, but also a little bit of a reframe that, focusing on boundaries can have this ripple effect. So she's, in a sense, lending some change talk there, but very much in alignment with what Kathleen has said.
Absolutely.
So, what would you say in order to reach this goal? What do you need to change?
I don't know how to change. It's something I'm totally working on.
Okay, so one thing.
Oh, you can just hear hear the difficulty in that, right? I don't know how to change. It's something I'm working on. She's definitely feeling a lack of ability, and so that might suggest that before we jump into what you can change, we might want to go back and look at what's the motivation for changing. What are your reasons for changing? What are your needs for changing? What are some steps you've already taken? And then also looking at that ability piece and seeing if we can increase her sense of ability to change, and then go in and ask what the questions are. Because once you're motivated, it's much easier to think of new solutions. And let's see what Amanda does here now that she's got, definitely there was a long pregnant pause there, bit of a sigh, and definitely a sense of kind of frustration that this issue keeps happening.
If you were to imagine yourself making a boundary, just a situation in your life right now, like what comes to your mind when you imagine? Is it a certain person you're talking to? Is it a situation? What might be one that you could picture?
So this is good, and I think part of this is coming from an email that recently went around amongst my friends and I about using imagination as a way to spark change. That if you can imagine the change, then we're more likely to implement that change. And so I think you can see Amanda here playing with this question. You'll see her play with it a couple more times, and see what kind of traction she can get with that question. And so I think a perfectly legitimate question. Again, at this point, I think we haven't quite established all of the motivation that needs to be established before we start looking at what are the steps she can take. But let's see how Kathleen reacts to this motivation question. I'm sorry.
Well, I think it's,
I meant to say not the motivation question, to this imagine question. So let's see what she does with that.
people in crisis that aren't even on my plate, that when I'm asked, I feel, or I don't feel, I just jump in to help. I just say yes. Why do I say yes? That is the question. There's something that's feeding that. Is it people pleasing? Is it Kathleen's the only one to save everybody? You know what I mean? If I don't do it, no one else will. There's something in there that I'm trying to learn.
Okay.
So it's very interesting. Amanda asked her to imagine one of these situations, and rather than getting, I think, what Amanda was hoping for, which would be imagining it going well, what's the best outcome, we got a bit more information about why it's difficult, and what are some of the things that are going on with Kathleen that cause her to jump in and help without setting appropriate boundaries. So still very good information. I don't think that this is wildly off track. It's just interesting to see at the beginning of this conversation, kind of going back and forth. I think you'll see in a minute that the conversation really hits a stride, but it does feel a little bit at this point like we're asking some questions and we're getting some sustained talk back, and we haven't quite hit the stride yet. So let's see what happens next.
So, a situation that you find yourself in frequently is you see a need or you hear a need, and you automatically want to say, maybe not even if you're asked, but you want to jump in and help fix it.
Beautiful summary. Great. Spot on.
Absolutely. That, yes, 100%.
She likes it.
Okay. And what would you say to this statement? A boundary is not just what is not okay, but what is okay. Like how does that resonate with you?
Okay, so this is a really good technique. What Amanda is seeing is that Kathleen is not just kind of forthcoming with the answers. She's feeling a little bit stuck, and so she's adding some information into the system and going to see, okay, if we add this piece in, what does Kathleen do with that? Okay, my one motivational interviewing pro tip with this would be to use elicit, provide, elicit. So start with asking Kathleen, "Hey, can I share something with you?" Would be one way to do that. To start with eliciting from her if it's okay, or perhaps eliciting from her, how do you define, marking a boundary? And then once she shares that, saying, can I share something with you that's been helpful? So I think it's a great piece of information. I think it was very appropriate in this context. From a motivational interviewing perspective, you would just want to do the evoking first before you provide. But what she did is she provided and she immediately evokes. So she goes right back to Kathleen, which is spot on.
So boundary keeps out what's not okay and keeps in what is okay.
Mm-hmm.
Am I understanding
Yeah.
that? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Do you picture that when you're thinking of your boundaries?
Not really.
Mm.
Pretty, off the cuff, really trying to stop answering with that kind of trauma,
Mm-hmm.
acting out of that broken person and maybe trying to take on others' pain or feeling like that's my role in life. I'm the person that, picks up the loose ends or the dump.
Mm.
So very interesting. I think she didn't necessarily latch onto that piece of information, and this happens a lot. We share something and somebody else, there's something going on internally. She's sharing with us what she thinks is important in this moment, and it's, this is coming from a place of brokenness and maybe some trauma and feeling like I'm the person who needs to help other people. So she's still cooperating with Amanda and really giving her information that is going to be helpful in the end to really finding something that can help with this situation. And it's just so interesting. I'm not trying to be overly critical here. It's just interesting when you watch it blow by blow. You can see things that you wouldn't be able, I wouldn't be able to see, no one would be able to see when you're just in the moment and these things go by. And I think what's interesting is that although there does seem to be a little bit of kind of mismatching or something going on here, you'll see by the end of this conversation, they're very much in alignment, and it's like that shaky part or that kind of getting used to each other part isn't even really remembered in the conversation. So keep that in mind as I'm offering these blow by blow criticisms of each and every line that's done. That in a real conversation, you're not going to notice it. They're not going to notice it. When things end well, that's what you remember. And this kind of going back and forth and trying to find your stride in the conversation is such a normal part of trying to help someone.
Right. So a boundary could be a little scary because this is a part of who you've been in a way. Like you said, you are the person who shows up, who helps fix. But you've also seen that that can be taken away from your own health, and that maybe you haven't kept a place of boundary for yourself to be helped and to be taking care of what you need as well.
Oh, we could take a month and take that apart. That was beautifully done. So she really reflected back what she heard, and then she used a very complex reflection at first. It's a little bit scary. That's not exactly what Kathleen said. She's reading into the situation and making some educated guesses about how this must feel. That's beautiful, right? So she says scary, and that might actually be a little bit of sustained talk, but then she's using a double-sided reflection where on the second half of it, she starts to talk about how, although it's scary, continuing to do it isn't good for your health and for yourself. Absolutely beautifully done, because I'm in the jerk seat today, and it's my job to advocate for motivational interviewing. The only thing I would change in there was that those two phrases were hinged on the word but. And if you have someone who is very psychologically reactive and may get defensive, using the word but can kind of cancel out the first thing that was said. If you use and, then you fully validate it and you say this other thing, it's less likely to bring up psychological reactance. So in this case, we're not dealing with anyone who's feeling a lot of psychological reactance. They're already starting to really mesh, and you're starting to see them get into a stride together, and it really, it's kind of it's definitely a finer point that than maybe even needs to be given at this point. But just as the advocate for motivational interviewing, I'll point that out. But holy cow, brilliant first half of that, where she did a complex reflection and then brought out this other side of it, so that she gives a two-sided reflection that ends on the reason to change. That very, very well done.
Absolutely. So the organized schedule is affected by my running around, picking up everybody's fire. So I'm not living my full life. It's really affected by this inability to say no.
Wow. And if you talk about what you're hoping for is some change talk at the end of what Amanda said, that was change talk. It was reasons to change. And those are pretty powerful and personal reasons to change. So it landed well.
So if you look forward and you picture saying no to someone, or even if someone didn't ask, but you hear of a situation and you automatically have that desire, but you have been working and saying, well, I want to be more mindful of what I say yes to, what would that look like for you? Like when you picture yourself setting that boundary, how does that make you feel?
So here we see again, Amanda is reworking this theme of picturing it, because we know if you picture it, you're more likely to do it in the future. This time she's had a bit more emphasis on the reflection and the motivation. So let's see if this hits differently now that she spent a little bit more time focusing on the motivation.
Amanda, you said, what's it look like if I was able to say no?
Yeah.
Like that I could live my full life. Like I could be everything that I want to be as a child of God, as a, friend and employee. I could be. And
Yeah. So you feel that by setting some boundaries, you actually could be more generous because
yes,
you're able to give because you have some of that energy and not just continually being drained.
yes. I love that. Yes.
That's
Oh man, yeah. If my sense was before that there was some, kind of settling into this conversation, they're in full stride right there. That was brilliant. That again was a very complex reflection or a reframe where she takes what Kathleen has said, which was all change talk, and said, you feel you could be more generous. What a great way to frame the idea of boundaries, that by setting a boundary, I actually end up becoming more generous to others. Beautifully done. And you can just see in the way Kathleen responds to that, that this is like, this is hitting all the right points. We're, definitely moving in the direction that towards change.
That's great. Yes. So when you see practical steps to get there, you've been envisioning, you have the desire to move forward to that. You see the positive outcomes that could be, but then there's the how do you get there? What are specific things that you could see helping you to move in that direction?
So that's a good example of a summary. What Amanda has done is she selectively summarized all the change talk and used that as kind of a bookend. Now we're going to go into concretely how do you make the change? What do you need to do that? So that's a perfect example of how you use a summary to we're going to put a cap on that part of the conversation where we were talking about your motivation and your desire. Now we're going to move into some steps moving forward. Beautifully done. Let's see how Kathleen responds to that.
I just have this visual of stop, drop, and roll. That sounds so stupid, but okay, someone texts or someone asks something, or something's not, been covered and I'm running out for that, to stop and just drop to my knees and just roll it over in my mind for a second before I'm, halfway down the block and committing something and then extra tired and thinking I got to stay here because I started, and, but maybe just a very intentional flag that comes up right away when something comes my way that way.
Mm-hmm.
Holy cow. If you were to take that whole thing that she said right there and compare that to how she was speaking at the beginning of this conversation, 100% change. That is a 180 change in what she's saying. If you look at that, everything in there was change talk. It was either something she could do, a reason why she would want to do it. There was no ambivalence or no ambiguity in there about how hard it would be or what would be difficult about it or what would be the downside of it. That was all change talk. Some of it focusing on, what she could do. And then, some of it was focusing on her reasons for doing it as well. But again, if you contrast that to where we were at the beginning of this conversation, night and day.
That's huge.
That is. So
She
a
says
thought
that's
of
huge.
stop, drop, and roll. It is something very catchy. It's like a mantra that you could tell or bring to mind easily, that gets you to pause, think about what you really want to do in that situation. And sometimes it could be yes, sometimes it could be no, but it gives you that time to assess, think about what it means, and if you want to say yes or no.
Oh, again, very, very well done. She took Kathleen's language, Kathleen's idea, Kathleen's conceptualization, and she totally affirms it. And she adds to it reasons why she thinks it would be good. It's easy to remember, it's a mantra, etc. Just extremely well done. In fact, let me just back that up and look at that 1 second here. Let's look at what she says again.
But maybe just a very intentional flag that comes up right away when something comes my way that way.
Mm-hmm.
That's huge.
That is. So a thought of stop, drop, and roll. It is something very catchy. It's like a mantra that you could tell or bring to mind easily, that gets you to pause, think about what you really want to do in that situation. And sometimes it could be yes, sometimes it could be no, but it gives you that time to assess, think about what it means, and if you want to say yes or no.
That was the other part of it that was brilliant, right? Is so in addition to using her language and so on, she also then really affirms Kathleen's autonomy and says, this doesn't necessarily mean you have to say no. It's just giving you the opportunity to say no. You really decide whether or not you want to say yes or no. That is hugely affirming of Kathleen's autonomy. And if she was starting to feel any fear about, like, oh no, this is too big of a change, this brings that fear way down, because you know what? You don't have to change. This is just giving you the opportunity to change if you'd like to change. So there was a lot in that, but very, very well done, very skillful.
I love that.
And she loves it.
That sounds like a very good next step to start you on this journey.
Wow. This was so helpful to me, Amanda. You can send me your bill. It's huge. Really, yeah. Wow. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I'll stop there. You know, the thing that I'd like to add to this is, I don't know, this was maybe a 5-minute conversation. So when we're talking about using motivational interviewing, a lot of people think of a formal relationship or a counseling relationship. Really, motivational interviewing has been studied in that context, but also in the context of a 5-minute conversation with your doctor at the end of a doctor visit. And that a 5-minute conversation can really encourage someone to make important health changes. And I think this is an example of a pretty significant issue for Kathleen. I think she looked kind of down about it at the beginning of this, and now feeling like, okay, I really have something I can do here that would change, that would make a difference for me. And so, that's my encouragement to people as you look at this, is that you can have a rocky start. Maybe it wasn't a rocky start. Maybe that was just me. But it looked to me like it was a little bit of a rocky start. And then just everything started hitting on all cylinders. And we went from having some ambivalence about it to being rock solid to being thank you for this, which is something I've always said about motivational interviewing, is that when you have these conversations with people, you're putting yourself in the role of a servant in order to help them. You're giving up talking about you, and you're giving up some of your turn taking in the conversation in order to focus on someone else and to bless them. And it's perceived that way by people. I feel blessed by this. I feel thankful for this. I'm going to send you I'm going to send you a check for this because it was so valuable to me. That is the kind of thing that happens a lot when we take the time to really listen to someone. So kudos to both these folks, and I thought they did a great job. If you want to see the full thing without my commentary, there'll be a link in the bottom. At the end of watching the full interaction between them, you'll hear a group of us kind of break it down in the moment and see some more insights into it. I hope that this was valuable to you, and we'll see you on the next one.